basically, in the main, we were talking about whether free will was actually the state that we live in, whether we actually have free will, or whether all of this is deterministic. That the deterministic conclusion can come both from, or this deterministic assumption or hypothesis is a deliverance both of pure naturalism that says you're deterministic because this all reduces to biochemistry, and biochemistry to particle interactions at some level, and particle interactions maybe to something like quantum states. So any indeterminacy that's in there is simply that indeterminacy. It might be ignorance, it might not be indeterminacy. But the bottom line is it wouldn't be free will in any of those cases, not the way that we're talking about it. But it's also a deliverance of religious belief. It's if you believe that what sovereignty of God means is that He's the only decision maker, and that all of the other decisions are illusory or are so highly limited that you think you can do two things, but in reality you can only do one, and you never have any ability to do the other one. That's a kind of determinism too. So
there's a couple of my sons and their friends, their take on it is, if God knows everything that's going to happen,
yes,
then it's fixed.
Right, okay. So this is I'll make a quick deviation to the, well, hold that question, ask it again in 30 seconds.
I don't know if it was a question.
Hold that statement and ask it again in 30 seconds. So we're looking at basically determinism, which is justified under a couple different ways, or free will. Does our feeling that we have free will, is that real, or is it illusory? And the question that got asked at the end of the class last time was, how do we know, and I'm going to rephrase it this way if this wasn't the way it was phrased, how do you know that God didn't just give us this sense that we have free will, but in reality, we don't? We don't, it is all deterministic, but God just makes us feel like we have free will. That question we can answer, and this question we can answer. So let me answer that first question first, and then let's go back to yours, because yours dovetails very nicely into both the question and what I think the answer is. So first, I'll ask, does anybody want to take a stab at answering the question, how do we know that God, what reasons do we have to believe that God would either give us the feeling that we have free will when in fact we don't, or alternately actually have imbibed us or imbued us with free will? Either one of those. But really the first question is the most important one. Is there any reason to believe, are there good reasons to believe, are there good reasons to not believe it's the case that God has made us feel like we have free will, but in reality we don't have free will? Any theories or hypotheses or general ideas or feelings or opinions? Surely there are opinions.
In the end goal that we don't have a choice, that God has already determined that.
Okay.
But in the process, He gives us options.
Okay.
He says, take every thought captive, it's your option. Why? That could be a book.
Okay.
And go from there. I think that we all have choices. Due to those end goals, God loves us so much that He wants us to make right choices.
Every thought captive. So as an example, take every thought captive implies not only do you have well, tell me if this is, do you agree with this statement? Take every thought captive not only implies that you have a choice about what you do, it sounds like you're being asked to have a choice about what you think. So that's pretty deep when it comes to free will. That means that would be kind of real free will to me. But by the same, so He gives us this order. God says, take every thought captive. Now what you did say was, but, can I say it this way? In reality, we don't actually have a choice. How would you phrase that? I forgot exactly how you phrased it.
But you don't have a choice about the end goal.
Ah.
You do have a choice about the end goal, but the end goal exists.
Okay.
You get to choose which end goal you want.
Okay, so you do have a choice. Okay, all right. I think I misunderstood what you were saying then. All right. I don't know that I disagree with what you're saying. Now, when you say God chooses the end goal, what do you mean by that?
You could come and be with Him,
Yes?
His way, or no way.
Okay, so you think, now, is it the case that you're saying God chooses the fact that there are two states at the end of your life, at the end of everyone's life, either being with God or being away from God? Or do you... Or do you think that it's the case that God decides who goes where and then causes people to act in such a way that they deserve one or the other under that regime?
If he was limiting who he was going to choose, he probably wouldn't make the Bible so free around the world.
Okay, so I'm not sure if I misunderstood your answer. Do you think that God, pick me as an example, did God say, I'm going to make Scott and I'm going to make him go to heaven, or I'm going to make Scott and I'm going to make him go to hell? I'm choosing which one, then I'm going to actualize it.
I do not think that is true.
Okay. So I think that you believe in free will, if I understand all this. Okay.
He loves every person so much that he will do and give you every opportunity to help you get to the most loving end goal.
We're in violent agreement, madam. Okay. Other opinions or ideas?
Can we make the question?
Is there any reason to think, so I was putting both sides out, but I'll put the negative side out. Is there any reason to think that God, is there any reason to think that God could not or would not cause us to feel like we have free will when in reality we don't? When in reality we don't.
Sort of the end game idea, the way I try to explain it to people who are wondering is, it's like if I played chess with God, whatever end game he wanted.
Checkmate in 3 moves. How did that happen?
Whatever end game he wanted, he could get me there while I had complete and total free will, because he knows my response to every move he'd make.
Yes. Okay.
And so he could make the right series of moves that would cause me in my free will choices to end up exactly where he wants me in the end. So it's not really the illusion of free will.
Okay.
It's just you're dealing with an incredibly smarter person than you, who, like a father with a child, giving them the options that get the child to make, or children are a
little different.
Fathers are a little less able. I don't think children are any more rebellious than I am.
Right.
So that's what I do with free will. I have total free will, but God is able to guide me in my choices
Okay.
through circumstances, through whatever's going on.
So let me give this view a name, because what this view right here does, and then Dennis and you two guys back here, there are two concepts of sovereignty out there. Some people in Christianity, when you say the word sovereignty, they immediately think that means God chooses everything. And some people, when you say sovereignty, means that God chooses some things, but that all things are his right to have his will with. Now, it depends on which one of those definitions you start with. So what sovereignty means is very important, which is why I'd like to stay, for the purposes of this discussion, outside without using the word sovereignty. When we want to talk sovereignty, that's a theological term or in a theological construct. We will do that in here if it's the will of the class. But let's avoid the term right now because it's confusing, because it's used in at least 2 ways. So when we're talking about this, what we really mean, let's just use the term God's will and our will when we're talking, and we have to specify what we mean. Do we mean will of outcome? Do we mean will of path? Do we mean every single step of the way? So this version right here is what I would call a free will view of sovereignty. And then maybe I'll give a deterministic view of sovereignty, and now if we want to avoid the term sovereignty, what we can say is a free will view of God-man interaction, both sides, okay? Both sides have free will. Another one might be a unilateral view of free will of God-man interactions. The unilateral view says there's free will, but there's only free will on one side. It's on God's side. The will of man is so bounded that it cannot reasonably be called free. So this is that more libertarian viewpoint. Dennis.
First of all, you can't checkmate 3 moves. It takes 7. It's the reason.
Yeah, I was saying per side, right?
But you said, do we have reason to believe that God could not? Well, can't God do anything? So isn't that an illogical option that you threw out?
Sorry, I'm stuck. I think I can think of 5 moves that get you to checkmate, but you'd have to be really intentionally dumb. Okay, yeah, go ahead, sorry. Ask your question again.
You said one of the options was
No, God can. So when I say God could not, I'm going to be pushing into the territory of logical impossibility. So it's true that that you'll hear Christians and even the Bible says, for God all things are possible. What the philosophers will do is say there's a hidden caveat in there that we don't always make. Everything we say has hidden caveats, you know. Yeah, I think this is a really good idea. What we never say is, unless I'm completely wrong and everybody's been lying to me, because it's just not a reasonable caveat to put on it. So the unreasonable caveat that people don't always put on God can do anything is God can do anything that is logically possible to do. So can God make a square circle? Can he make a married bachelor? That kind of stuff. So other than those, so what I mean is there any kind of square circle married bachelor version of this that says, no, he literally couldn't do that because it's logically impossible to both do A and not A at the same time?
But the option you threw out was not that.
So yeah, the option I threw out, my question is it that? So I haven't answered that yet, but yeah, but you're exactly right. That's the question that we're trying to determine. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so with chess moves, I mean, that doesn't take into account like the ethical nature of your opponent at the time. So I mean, I mean, in the world of omniscience, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck and acts like a duck, it doesn't necessarily imply that it's a duck.
Right.
And so I mean, it's one of those things where it's like in warfare, we don't hold the foreign power that submits to the victor ethically responsible for their actions in support of the authority that caused the act itself.
Right.
However, in the Old Testament, God does hold the entire society responsible for
Right.
their actions.
Right.
And then there's also Romans 22, which talks about, you know, how can you judge God being the potter and you being the clay?
Yes.
That's something prepared for destruction.
Right.
So it's one of those things. It's like he may be walking some people into a specific fold as a result of their choices in life. So I mean, it's one of those things. It's like you don't necessarily know what that is, but in the end, when you watch the judgment occur, it'll be sufficient in that result.
So I don't think I disagree with anything there. I have a little bit of a peccadillo about the Potter analogy that you didn't necessarily run into it, but I keep it out there depending on what your interpretation is. But it seems to me that what you just said there isn't necessarily at variance with what he said. So is it the case that God is just basically playing three-dimensional chess with us better than we can, but we still freely choose to do things? That is to say, is what you're talking about, does it have any impact on the question of whether there are reasons to think that God could or would allow us to have free will, or could not or would not allow us to have free will?
Well, I mean, there are damping factors that basically can take hits beyond measure and literally have no impact on the result.
Yes,
So
right.
it's one of those things where it's like you can have free will so long as I mean that's basically why the Christian community is taught, you know, turn the other cheek, just take it, because that amount of abuse returns the entire control over to God. Because I mean, you're eating all the world's nastiness. So I mean, it's one of those things. It's like if you can build yourself into a vessel that is capable of handling that type of experience, then literally the free will of the world that results, typically speaking, toward evil acts will have no impact. Will have no impact in free will.
Okay, but it seems to me that what you're saying is there's an assumption baked in there is that we do have free will.
I mean, yes.
Yeah, okay.
But what I'm saying is that like that you can have free will, and then the impact of everyone else's free will if everyone else has free will. I mean, because I can assume that I do and you don't and stuff like
Right,
that.
right, right.
Unsolved and stuff like that. But
Yep.
but that will have no gauge on the grander scheme of things. Because I mean, there's the physical manifestation of ourselves.
Yes.
Which allows us to communicate. And then there's the spiritual aspect, which is my manifested being as a result of my experience and my future actions as a result of what I've learned from my experience.
Yes.
And so I mean, like, I don't know how to explain this succinctly, but I have to flesh it out a little bit. But basically that perspective, like in terms of like acting like a duck, quacking like a duck, stuff like that, so that the world's definition of married bachelor stays fixed, but to God it literally is meaningless because you were moved that way. So I mean, like it doesn't inherently equate to your moral character as a result of the actions you take in this life.
Okay, I think I want to disagree with you. And I want to disagree with you on 2 grounds, 3 grounds. First, I don't think anything that has linguistic content by which we mean something is meaningless to God. So at a minimum, whether God says that's a truth or that's a falsehood or that's a logical inconsistency, it still means something that you can say that's either true. It has enough semantic content in it to say that's true, that's false, or that's self-contradictory, which would lead to a value of false. But I don't know that was core to your point. So let's brush that aside for now. And I would say, I think that we are interwoven a lot more tightly than that view takes into account. So I will certainly agree with you that there are dampening effects out there. And some of them you might say, it's the way that we view gravity now, or we view a lot of physics, as you say, well, it's some distance from some event. The effects on this other thing are so small that they're negligible and we ignore them. But are they truly zero? Technically, many of these things are probably not zero, and that every particle in the universe affects the other one, and this is where the chaos theoreticians try to make their money, metaphorically speaking. I think, though, when it comes to interpersonal relations, it's hard to imagine interactions, even let's take some of the most simple superficial interactions. I'm a stocker, a grocery stocker at the store, and you walk past me, and I look up at you, and you look back down across at the shelves and you keep walking. That seems as superficial an interaction as it can happen. We literally didn't speak to each other, like made eye contact for half a second and looked away. If that guy or gal, if in this case me, if I'm carrying in myself a belief of, guys that are like you, and I've now put on you based on how you're dressed and how your hair's cut and how you look and how you walk and all that stuff, think about guys like me a certain way, and you walk past, that actually has some moral impression on me of like, see, I was right. It's another data point. This is how these guys are. Now, if you happen to be wearing a what would Jesus do bracelet, and I see that, I might mentally convert that into a whole range of things. And so here this trivial interaction goes on, and I've said, yeah, see, these Christians are stuck up and they won't even say hi to me. Some people do live in that world, and the deeper we are in some emotional state, the more likely we are to make these kinds of assessments. I see nodding, so I'm not completely off base here. So I think now over time you might say, well, they were already on that track, they were headed on that track. So in the long term, there was, whether that was one of the data points that took them there, from their initial 2 data point vector and their final point, it was all headed in that direction anyway. We can agree on that one. But there is a path by which they got there, and I think that path is non-negligible for 2 reasons that I've outlined before. One of them is it convinces us of the justice of our final position in some way, or of at least how we got to our final position, and we can argue whether that was just or unjust. And the other thing is it takes away the excuse of don't tell me I'm a good person or a bad person because there's no evidence of it. Well, you've got 40 years or 70 years or 90 years of evidence that says you had this range of choices, these were the choices you made. And even if you didn't have the choice to be the President of the United States or the world's greatest basketball player or CEO or whatever, you did have this set of choices, and that showed who you were morally speaking. Because God's not concerned, I don't think, with whether you're the president or not. He's concerned with are you morally upright, where moral uprightness in Christianity means an acknowledgement of God as Lord and Savior. So all that to say, this is a deep subject that I think we should go into, but I don't know that it touches exactly the question that I'm asking right here. So let me come back to this question for 1 second, then we can re-engage on this when it makes sense in a second here. Let me throw something out for y'all. God says, take every thought captive. Now, what would you call that? What kind of statement is that? It's a command, right? So God commands, but what we mean is when God commands, he says, I have the right to tell you what to do, or I have the right to ask you what to do, or I have the right to say you should do this. And we have a responsibility to obey it. This makes an assumption, obviously, is that you think that God is in charge. So let's say that the Christian view of God, and we're talking about a Christian view of God, is that he's in charge and he has the right to say that. So that's an assumption. But in reality, and I know you didn't say this, but I'm going to say this because some people do, and this was really the question they got asked last time. But in reality, we cannot do so. Okay, but now the lady last time asked, I forget who asked it, I know it was a lady, said, does God make us think that we can? But in reality, we cannot. Does anybody see a problem with this? And if so, what is it? So there's nothing self-conscious. Oh, yes, sir.
I don't have any high philosophical background for this. I just kind of have a feeling.
Okay.
And it seems to me that understanding the nature of God and understanding the will of God, that he wouldn't make a world of automatons. He wouldn't make machines that just do their thing.
Yep.
That's it. I don't think he'd make a grand illusion where he says that we have free will, but in reality we don't.
Because who would he be tricking?
Right.
So you never have to apologize that you don't, I have a great philosophical training. The philosophical questions, the greatest philosophical questions are in fact the simplest. So you don't need any training to ask the greatest questions. You might not need that much training to answer them. In fact, there's some argument that might say more training means less possibility of answering it. It seems to be the case sometimes. So we could probably recast these in rigorous philosophical terms, but the point and the question were exactly correct. And using the language you did, and common vernacular that we all understand, to me highlights exactly the problem with this one, is we use these two words right here. Both of these words came out in this articulation. It's an illusion and it's a trick. Now, someone tell me what is the definition of this right here? What is this? How do you define this term? What is a lie?
Knowingly stating something that's untrue.
I like that. Knowingly. Well, I'll look at this for a second. Knowingly stating something that is untrue. And what do you mean by untrue? So, untrue, false, or to use Aristotle's definition, to say of something that it is when it is not. But untrue is, I think, as close to that as you can get without saying that. So does something have to be knowingly stated? Yes. Can you accidentally state a lie?
No.
So let's say that you really believe that tobacco causes cancer. I assume the answer is yes, but maybe we're wrong about that. So if I tell you, hey, tobacco causes cancer, and that is false.
You're not lying, you're just uninformed.
Okay. So then a lie is not an untruth. It is a statement, under your definition, of
It's
knowingly doing it.
You're telling the truth. It's not naivete or ignorance.
Okay.
It's you have to know that you have to actively know that you're saying something untrue.
What do you think? Does that sound right? Okay. Now, a philosopher is going to disagree with that. And what he's going to say, or she's going to say is so here's what Aristotle says. Saying something is true is saying, a true statement is saying something is that is. And a lie is saying something is not when it is, or that it is when it is not, in the converse.
So I've gotten into this discussion with my wife a few times. We take different stances.
The look on her face says that yes, it's there.
Aristotle.
Okay, so let me resolve your conflict. I hope. Here's how you would do it. we say lie, and that has moral implications for us. We're like, if I say someone's a liar, that is equivalent to saying they are morally bad. I'm not saying they're just ignorant. I'm saying they're morally bad. So in your term, what you're saying is I'm using this definition to say that it's a lie. It's an untruth. So the difference here is you've taken action right here, and you've applied it to a state of an assertion that is about something. Aristotle does not make any moral judgment. Aristotle only says there is fact A, and if you say A, then that's true. And if you say not A, then that's false. It doesn't matter why you said it. It doesn't matter when you said it. It doesn't matter how you said it. And as long as you said A when A is the case, that's true. If you said not A when A is the case, that's false.
But false is different than a lie.
Exactly. So that's where the problem here is you're saying this right here is the definition of what makes something a lie or true. So you would say the following: a lie, something that is a lie and something that is false are not the same thing.
Correct.
Okay. So the philosopher is not so sophisticated in his analysis. He merely says that which is, if you say something that's false, you're technically telling a lie. Forget about that. Now then, let me recast it in terms of false or true, or let's leave it in that term. Let's say that that's the case. If you adopt his definition, if you knowingly say something is false when it's in fact true, if God puts out an illusion, does God know what's true? Does he allows you to think something that's not true, and he's the one that did it? What does that make God? If he tricks you, he causes you to believe something that is false, and he was the cause of it, what does that make God? In this definition. Okay, right. Yes, ma'am.
So it seems like most Christians are all right with giving God the attribute of being timeless.
Okay.
But I don't think we actually know what that means.
Yes.
Because as soon as there is a fixed point in our own future where God says this will happen, we all of a sudden, puff out our chests and have pride. That we think we can prevent it. We think we're going to make choices that could never happen.
Yes.
But I think that isn't a reflection of God taking free will. It's
Okay.
a reflection of God being timeless. So we kind of need to explore what that means.
Okay, so I'm going to send you this. This is my paper talking about, Brian Leftow talks about divine atemporality and presentism. And I'm not going to subject any of the rest of you to this because I love you. Basically, Leftow is saying God is atemporal in his nature. He actually goes up against, he says that another viewpoint, an opposite viewpoint, is that God's atemporal but then becomes temporal. This is William Craig's view. And so he criticizes that one. And this is my criticism of Leftow's view. And I talk about, I've actually knit parts of the Trinity argument into this one because the Trinity argument is based on in a concept that says there exist both atemporal and temporal modes of existence. And God, being omnipresent by definition, must inhabit both of those worlds for the following reasons, A, B, C, D, and E. This is incomplete, but it answers, I think it's going to answer the question you just asked. And it'll talk about why that is. And I talk a little bit about temporal metrics being the reason for that, the differentiation. I'm not sold on my own answer on that one. I think there's more work to be done on that one. But the key point is this right here. So when you look for it, look for the paragraph that has S and S asterisk, S prime. This is how he refers to it. That right there addresses your exact question. And but it takes a fair amount of background to get there that we don't have time for in class. So if you don't object, I'll send you this and you can look through it.
So on the distinction between lies and falsehoods, I'm not sure I got all the differences, but with what you were saying about purposefully creating a trick or illusion,
Yes.
what would you think of as they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going further?
Yes. So this is a very good question. Is Jesus lying to his disciples? Right? Is he causing them to think something that's false? Or is he testing them? And now, of course, if he's testing them, what do we end up falling back to? There's another verse that says, God tempts no one. Okay, can you test somebody without tempting them? Yes, let's say that's the case. Okay. So the question is God testing them here? Now, of course, if God can test them and saying, I feel like I'm going to go this way, or it looks like I'm going to go this way, let me recast that one if I'm trying to be an apologist and say that that's not the case, that this is not trickery. That what he's saying is, there is, remember, under the definition that we're operating here. So I haven't taken on the Aristotelian thing that's just, this is facts. And if you say one fact, if you give the impression that one fact is going on, it's not that fact, then that's a lie. What we're talking about is a moral, I'm knowingly causing someone to hold on to or believe something that is false, that the intent is important. So let me ask another intent question for you, and I think that this is the answer to that question if I wanted to argue against you there. And I will pick the generic term. Your wife, girlfriend, whatever, says to you, and this works the other way around, hey, how do these jeans look on me? And the answer is, the correct opinion is, from an optical perspective, they increase your apparent volume by 20 to 25%. In the vernacular is, I think they make you look fat. The husband who says, these jeans make you look fat, it's either the case that the wife and the husband live in a special relationship where she expects you to say that and she wants you to say that. That is to say, tell me which of these two jeans make me look fat, and if you make me go outside and the jeans that make me look fat, I'm going to be upset with you. And that when you tell her they make you look fat, that she's like, thank you very much. There's another set of ladies out there, and I'll call that the vast majority, it seems to me, that say, I don't want to hear, I think there's a blue-collar comedian out there who says that correct answer to that question is, I can barely see you in this light. They make you look so skinny. So it's, when someone asks that question, when they ask the question, they're not asking with a desire to actually know the answer to the question. They want to hear an assurance in that case. It is not a request for a rigorous analysis. It's a request for encouragement. The superficial version of that is, hey, how you doing? And if someone's like, I'm glad you asked. On the work front, and 10-minute conversation later. On a home front, I'm having some real difficulties, a 20-minute conversation later. You asked how I'm doing, there it goes. Or there's a comedian that says, if he got up and said, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, he's like, okay, yes, I do. This room looks like it was decorated in the 1960s. I don't think you're a very good-looking person. This guy over here is getting me a little bit worried. Do you want me to keep going, or are you going to ask me some questions? So, do you tell the truth, the whole truth, or nothing but the truth? No, what they're really saying is, we want you to be truthful. So the question here is Jesus causing these guys to believe something that later in life they're going to be like, I can't believe that he convinced us, or he made us think we were going to go to the next village. How dare he? What a liar. It's more like, oh, I see what you were doing there. You were trying to draw this out of us, type of thing. Now, can that same thing apply here? I will argue, for the sake of this hypothesis, that no, it doesn't apply here, because what God's saying is, do this command, and then in reality, we can't do it. So that later we'll be like, oh yeah, I see what he was doing there. Well, we can't later say, oh, I see what he's doing there, unless he's programming us to do that. So in my mind, this is a very, the reason these other, what we call white lies, are acceptable in our culture is because nobody sees them as consequential in any vein, and when they ask the question, how are you doing, they're actually lying. What they're saying is, I'm saying, tell me, I'm interested in knowing how you're doing. When they really say is, I'm engaging in a quick greeting so that we can start the actual conversation. I don't really want to know how you're doing. In the case of folks going from one village to another, it's, Jesus doesn't see the geographical displacement of one place to another as meaningful at all, not meaningful at all, as anything other than absolutely superficial. The question is, what choices are you guys going to make? I'm going to present you a choice. So I don't know that that's a terribly good answer to that question, but it at least, I want to introduce the concept of when a question is asked, the intent of the questioner matters. And so when this question is asked, can God test without tempting? If God's test is, if I were going further, what would you say? If we were staying here, what would you say, and why is it meaningful? That could be a test without a temptation. So leave that to you to work through whether you like it or not, but ultimately, I'm going to try to I'll make the contention, and we'll leave it and move to the next topic here, that at least there's one reason to think that God cannot do this, and that's that to trick us into believing we have free will would be to lie. Now, let's say that's not the case. Let's say that you get around it and you say, nope, I can see how I'm going to blow this other one up and say it's just the same thing, so that's not a lie. Okay, fine. Then it's somebody else said it. It's theater. It's all theater. In this case, God has basically made a puppet show, and he's executing the puppet show, and the puppets in it believe that they're in a real deal, but in reality, it's all a puppet show. Now you have to ask the question of why would God go through this puppet show, especially if the puppets suffer, are given apparent moral choices and all that kind of stuff. So the right answer to me to this question is this word right here. All of this depends on what your definition of God is. If God is a maximally great being who by definition is omnipotent, omnibenevolent, all-loving, all-knowing, everything good, all good, and will never do anything wrong, and will never lie, and will never whatever, that makes it incompatible with creating that fundamental baseline illusion that you think you have free will, and in fact you don't, that it's all a trick. Now, it is certainly the case that we humans seem to think that we have more power than we really do. But that's a result of our own failure to calculate well. That's not a result of God putting in us a feeling that we're all powerful and we're not. Do you see the contradiction here? Does God make us, does a all-loving, all-good being cause us to think something that is false? Does an all-good being cause us to think something is false? That seems to me to be just kind of from an intuitive perspective, too close to making, and remember, this isn't a trivial thing. This is like the most important question in life. What's the key to happiness? How do I get to heaven? All that stuff. This is how you do it. Just kidding. I'm tricking you guys all at the back. That seems to me incompatible with the truth-telling God.
So I wouldn't want to make an argument against free will, so that's not my purpose here, but I'm curious, does 3 follow from 1 and 2?
No. This is not a syllogism. I've articulated the argument. I haven't put them down. Yes, that's right.
Because I'm wondering if, for instance, it could be said that we think we have free will, we don't. It's not meant as an illusion. It's not created as an illusion. Maybe the best analogy I can think of is how...
I'll stop you there and then ask the rest of your question. Fair. But the question that was asked last week was, does God make us think that we have free will? So I was answering that question, does God make us think we have free will? And this is my answer for why I think, no, he doesn't make us think we have free will. Now, a second question Brian asks is, we are deterministic, but we somehow came up with this ourselves. If we're deterministic and we don't have free will, then no thought we have is anything we came up with ourselves.
So the thing I would look at there is the question, and actually that was brought up about the difference between temptation and testing. So God may allow a test, and the devil creates the temptation. So it may be that if God allowed the possibility of these deterministic beings to be deceived, and they were deceived by the devil.
Let me recast that in true deterministic terms. God caused the devil to cause these other deterministic beings to act in a certain way. So it's a set of billiard balls here. There's nobody's actually getting deceived.
Well, again, not what I would necessarily argue, but let's say that the devil has free will, we do not. So then he has the choice to take this system and attempt to...
I see, yes, okay. Yes, I think there's not a problem with that. Yes, now the question then would be, would God allow the creation of beings that think they have free will that do not? So I refer you back to last time to say the concept of intentionality is used as an argument against monism versus dualism when it comes to mind-brain problem. But think about it in terms of maybe moral problems as well. Would we live in a moral intentional state if we didn't have a moral sense? So what I mean there is we think things are right and wrong. And then we can also think about, is it right or wrong to think this thing is right or wrong? So maybe you can say that's a higher order, second order thinking about right and wrong, or why are things right and wrong? This thinking about moral considerations, and maybe even the moral feeling about moral considerations, right? Maybe we could articulate in here this really good view of why. Well, has anybody seen the new Avengers movie with the Infinity Stones thing? They've got the bad guy in that one whose goal is to wipe out half the life in the universe. They give him a quote unquote good motivation for this one, which is nobody here understands, but you've overpopulated everything. And for every world where I've reduced the population by half randomly, that is to say fairly and justly, which technically is his version of justice isn't I see what he's getting at. Fairness, and fairly we would say in any case. Fairly, that the result was a much a morally superior world. It was better because of what he had done. And so for that and this was a utilitarian ethic, right? The ends justified the means for him. But as this utilitarian ethic, if you don't have a reason to think utilitarianism is wrong, you don't really have a very good argument against the main villain in the movie. And I leave that up to you. But in my mind, it's the fact that we see that happen, and we hear this really good articulation for, look, I'm going to wipe out half the population of the universe with a snap of my fingers, and things will be better. And we look around and we're like, okay, he's done it on this world and things were better. He did it on this world and things were better. He's right, it was better on all of these worlds. So we hear the argument, we see the evidence for it, but at the end of the day, we say, okay, would you snap your fingers and wipe out half of the population of the earth? What's your answer?
I might be half.
Yeah, well, okay, that's a little too self-interested in that. But we still have this feeling of, it still doesn't seem right to me. The feeling that it still doesn't seem right to me is an intentional state. That to me is what I would call a moral intentional state. That says, I have a feeling about this that gainsays what logic delivers, and that difference right there is explainable in one of two ways. One of them is that it's this deterministic reaction that happens in me, and the second one is there's a higher moral sense that it is this moral state from which I'm deriving the truth value of these arguments that are put against me. It's the reason that we, even when somebody convinces us, hey, maybe Hitler wasn't that bad a guy, we'll listen to the arguments and maybe nod and be like, those arguments make sense. I still think he was a bad guy. So whether you buy that as maybe there's a moral intentional state or not, I would offer that kind of intuitive feeling of there are things that are really right and really wrong, to say, why would God or the devil, why would God, not the devil, we know why the devil might do it, why would God program us with such a thing if he's interested in love?
So circling back to the temporal point that was made, so I want to copy your paper too, but the thing that comes to mind is, like, we make the assumption that because God is timeless, that he's seen the end and he has dictated all the intricate outcomes of the end.
Yes,
That's
right.
an assumption. Like, is it possible that God, yes, God, I think we all agree God is timeless, but is it possible that it's some aspect of setting things in motion
Yes?
and happening to know how they turn out without influencing how they turn out or without dictating how they turn out, which would lend itself to free will?
I am so vested in believing yes on that one that I have another paper on that one that some of the folks in class have reviewed for me on the problem of evil. And so yes, I agree that that's not only, first you have to show that it's possible. But I think that has actually been done by philosophers something like 60 years ago or 70 years ago. They showed it was possible. Now the question is, how do you show it's probable? And I do make a probabilistic argument, but I'm trying really hard to go all the way to say it's necessarily the case that God would do something like this, that the variable that's in there basically has to do with size of the population. But once you pick a size of the population, maybe again because of a necessary constraint, that the rest of it will follow in some ways necessarily because of God's character. So yeah, I think that you're right. All right, that was, I know I took us a little bit off track and maybe a little deeper than we wanted to go philosophically speaking on that one, but I wanted to say there's a good reason to think God would not trick us. And if God would not trick us, if we think that makes sense, trick us in deep, profound, core realities of life, then this is basically my definition. This is his definition of a lie. Maybe I like his definition for these purposes. Now, for completeness, what can we take Aristotle's definition? So now, Madam does have Aristotle on her side, so you got a little bit of an uphill fight there. In Aristotle's definition, can it be the case that God is doing that? Judgment Day. Okay, so Aristotle comes out on Judgment Day, and God says the following things. I said that a creature that does chooses to do right and wrong, is those that choose to do right are the righteous, and they may enter into the kingdom, and those that choose to do wrong are the wicked, and they may not enter into the kingdom. Now, the question is this: does God ever say we choose to do right or wrong in the Bible? Or is it simply that people act one way or another? I ask you, Christians, Bible readers, does the Bible ever say that anywhere?
Sounds like an important question that we ought to be able to.
Yeah, it should be at our fingertips, but
Sorry.
I don't know.
That's all I got.
Okay, well, good. Then I can assign homework on this one. If the Bible says somewhere that we choose to do something that is good or bad, that the reason God holds us accountable is that we choose, or maybe hint, that the reason God holds us accountable is that we could do certain things, but we choose not to do them. Then, at the judgment day, if he says, my standard of justice is whether you choose to do it or not, you didn't choose to do it, therefore not. Now, a lot of the articulations don't have those words in them, but the question is that anywhere in the Bible? If it is, then the problem is on Judgment Day, God is saying something is that it is not. That he says, it is just that I let you into heaven, it is just that I condemn you, because you chose to do the wrong or you chose to do the right. And remember, the Christian doing the right has to do with acknowledgement that you did the wrong, and the right thing to do then is to ask God for mercy in this case, to which he has promised to extend it.
Yeah, well, no, my question is, where does grace come in then?
Yeah, and that would be the doing the right is where you would go to John and say, Jesus says, he who does the will of my Father in heaven will enter the kingdom of heaven. And then later, not exactly right there, he says, the will of my Father is to believe in he whom he has sent. And then we say, what does it mean to believe in Jesus? Now you can argue what it means. I say believing in Jesus means you acknowledge him as Lord and Savior. Lord means I will obey you, and you genuinely try to obey him. And when you choose to fail to obey him, because I still think in the free will thing, that you immediately go back to him, or eventually go back to him and say, I was wrong to do this. I ask for your mercy. And then he's already promised to give you that grace.
There is places in the Old Testament where the law is saying the soul that sins presumptuously has a more severe punishment than the soul that sins. It doesn't use the term
Accidentally, yeah. If you accidentally walk on a dead body, then you're unclean, but you don't have to do this. If you don't know about it, if you do know about it, then it's this other thing, right?
And the same with manslaughter,
Yeah.
didn't hold a grudge against him before, it was unintentional, and he drops it.
Heat of the moment, passion, yep. The real question is, does the Bible anywhere talk about free will in such a way that God could not? He's articulated that you have a choice, but then it turns around that he's telling you that in reality that you don't. Because he would be unjust. You see, the ultimate point there is God would be unjust if that's the case.
There's like an idea with respect to combat theory that basically says that if you choose not to move, you can expose no weakness. And so in that process of God providing you, I mean, like when you sit down with a teacher and you're not moving, you're just absorbing the content that the world has to express at you at that point in time. You are entering into a state of oh man, how do I describe this? Inaction, but like it's really hard to describe. Let me think about it a little bit.
Okay,
So I
yeah.
can give you a better idea of what I'm trying to get at here.
Yes.
And I'll talk to you after class.
Okay, very good. If where you were heading is something like, can we? Well, I'll let you ask the question. Other thoughts? If not, I got one other thing maybe to say on this.
I just had a question on number 3. This person made a statement about, but in reality we cannot, and that is questioning her reality. Does she really know reality at all? And maybe God knowing all reality.
So This statement is meant to be agnostic of that fact. It doesn't, this statement says that reality simply is a correct description of what is, or maybe what we would say is the way God knows it to be. So it doesn't matter whether they think that or not. I'm just saying that as God knows it to be, we cannot. So maybe I could reformulate it to say, does God make us think that we can do things, but God knows that we cannot do things? And what I should have said then is, does God make us think we can choose, but in reality we cannot choose?
Not to that, but the whole thing with free will, as we're going into this conversation, I keep thinking, I really want free will.
Right.
I want to be autonomous. I want to be, but it's limited by so much. I can't fly. I really want to, but I can't just fly.
Right.
I'm influenced. I don't want to be influenced by other people, but I'm influenced. Both people trying to influence me and me wanting to influence.
This is not a paid transition. This is exactly where I wanted to go next.
So when I think about free will and the propensity to sin,
Yes.
is a big hammering. Because if I had real free will in this immoral body, in this immoral state, I'd be doing all kinds of bad things.
Right.
So free will, it's a hard thing to define, what we mean by free will.
Yeah, so what I mean by free will in the context of this conversation, what I think the real definition of free will is, you are capable of choosing between the available options. Period.
With lots of influences affecting all that.
Not to say one option couldn't, this is the donut thing, this is the 2 marshmallow thing. One of them may feel like a real drag, but even as much as that kid is dying to have that marshmallow, somehow he continues to do it. You remember what I said the solution was for the kid with the marshmallows? What do? How do you stop it from being a struggle for him? Y'all weren't here. Distraction. So this is the experiment that they do for those that haven't been here was, well, some of you have been listening online. They give the kid a marshmallow, and then they say, you can eat this marshmallow, or if you'll wait 10 minutes or whatever the time period was, I'll give you a second marshmallow and you can have 2. But if you eat this one now, you only have 1. If you wait 10 minutes, you can have 2. And watching the kids just come apart. Some of them are instantly like, yeah, I don't care. And some of them just sit there and they drum their fingers and they twitch and some of them fail halfway through and some of them turn away and just don't pay any attention to it and they wait for the second one. But most of them are in that state of extreme agitation where they're struggling with this one. And the easiest thing to do with that kid to stop him from, they don't do this in the experiment, I'm saying, based on my knowledge of kids, has been give them an iPad with a game they like on it, and they'll have forgotten the marshmallows there in the first place. My second son would definitely forget the marshmallows there in the first place. So what's the moral lesson for us? If we have decided that here's a moral choice, a wrong moral choice that I very much want to do, and a right moral choice that I know is the one that I want to do, the longer I sit there and stare at the actualization of it, I know it's the wrong moral choice if I'm an alcoholic to go and fall down drunk again. Anybody who's an alcoholic who walks into a bar and is like, you're like, you idiot, what are you doing? Get out of the bar and go somewhere else that there's no alcohol. That's the right solution. Now, what about us morally? What's the right solution? What causes you to fall? What things in your life do you do that you wish you didn't do? And I'll tell you, as I've said before, that most of that happens, most of that draw happens when you get put in a scenario where the temptation is present. What is the scripture that tells us how to deal with this one? What do you do when temptation is there? Do you fight it? Do you run? And you're like, run? That sounds like cowardice. You tell a Marine that the right answer to this one is retreat, and retreat at all due speed. Throw your weapon down and keep running as fast as you can. That's what it sounds like. That's not the point. This is a tactical withdrawal so that you can get to another spot. Now, Marines are not famous for tactical withdrawals to envelop. We're like, right up the middle is right the place to be. But the greatest victories are always the ones where it looks like you're going up the middle, and in reality, you're going around the side, that kind of thing. So in the case of temptation, it's you withdraw from that spot because you're in an ambush. You're in an ambush. And doctrinally speaking, for infantry squad or platoon or whatever else, if you end up in an ambush site, you know what the doctrine for what to do in an ambush site is? Get out of the ambush site as fast as possible. And then remaneuver and not quit, attack. But you can't, you're at a disadvantage there. Don't attack from where you have a disadvantage. Go to a place of advantage and then attack. For the Christian, for anybody concerned with the moral question, getting to the point where you have a moral advantage is where you come from a position of strength. Now, where's a position of strength for you? If you struggle with alcohol consumption, and let's say that you don't want to fall down drunk all the time, the position of weakness where you're under difficulty is, do I go and hang out with my 3 friends where we know we're going to end up at a bar tonight, or do I go and hang out with my 3 Christian friends, and when I want to interact with my other 3 friends, because it's not like I don't want to leave them, Jesus spent an awful lot of time with tax collectors, prostitutes, unrighteous people, all this other stuff, and he was criticized for it. It wasn't that he didn't do that, but did he go there with his disciples? Yeah, it seems like he had a posse. He had a, what do they call it now? What do we call the group? An entourage. He had an entourage. And also, this is God in flesh. How much time did he spend retreating from the world and walking out in the middle of nowhere praying? You're like, how much time does he need to pray to get his heart right? God, as man, if the Christian view is right, said, I have to spend a lot of time away from interacting with other human beings in order to make sure that I'm in the right spot. Now, not like go be a loner necessarily, but because he's not being alone. Where's he being with? He's letting himself talk undistracted to the source of truth, goodness, and knowledge. He's in dialogue with God, the Father. And in that sense, that is where your power comes from. And then, when your batteries are charged, you can walk into the world. And then you can walk back out and do that again. And that's what he does. And that's how we should do it too. So if you want to know how to make the choices, don't assume you're Superman. Don't assume you're Superman. Instead say, hey, I get stuck in this ambush position, I'm going to get smoked. So the right answer is, don't walk into a place where you can get ambushed. And if you happen to have miscalculated and end up in an ambush, get out of the ambush, pull back to a position of strength, come back and reattack later. This is how choices are made. This is how victories are won. They're not won blundering ahead without any thought about it. Make your decisions beforehand. I've told you, I'll retell it again because the study matters. I told you raise your hand if you remember me talking about the Special Operations fMRI study? No? Good, then I have a couple. I'll retell it. Jack, sorry. Or alternately, you've been paying attention. Congratulations. I got asked to help some folks at Georgetown, and University of Maryland was doing a study. What makes a high performer a performer? Why are really high-speed special operations troops better, supposedly, than your average snuffy in the Army or the Marines or wherever else? And initially they wanted me to get like, can you go to these special operations tryouts, and the guys that make it, bring them and we'll scan their brains, and the guys that fail, bring them and we'll scan their brains. And I was like, it's going to be a little difficult to convince the general and be like, hey, these guys that just failed, I want to call them losers, and I want to take them in and scan your brain and be like, we want to find out why you're a loser. So that's not really the truth. That's not the way it seems. But you can see how it might send that impression, Hey, you didn't do a very good job here. Can we scan your brain, find out what's the matter with you? Because we want to make sure we don't pick other people like you anymore. That seems to be what it might be saying. Yeah, that's the hot ticket, isn't it? So what I did instead was I used a control group of ROTC cadets based on the assumption of 10 ROTC cadets, maybe 1 or 2 of them have what it takes to be one of these guys, but then take these proven veterans. And then we pulled a bunch of supermen and brought them in. And the test was this: you're going to lay in an fMRI machine, and they're going to present these pictures to you. And it's from this psychological battery of pictures that are internationally known. They are supposed to induce in you kind of bad feelings. They're kind of like bad pictures, worrisome pictures, where the pictures are mostly like injured people or people who've been in car accidents, or somebody's head got smashed completely. I mean, there's some pretty horrific pictures, you would say. A few of them are like a soldier pointing a gun at a kid, but it's like so obviously photoshopped that if you've paid any attention in the computers in the last 10 years, you're like, yeah, sorry, it's not going to do it for me. And so the first thing I had to give them was, all right, well, you're going to have to rethink this for the special operations troops, because they're not going to see these pictures the way everybody else is going to see these pictures. And they said, why? And I'm looking at a picture of this guy terrible bruising all down his body, swollen all over the place. He's got something like 200 stitches working down his body. And I'm like, says, this is a very positive picture. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, they put 200 stitches in this guy. This is a post-op picture. He's going to be okay, right? And then there was another one of some lady it was horrific. Bottom line is her head was not intact. And I said, these guys are not going to be worried about that. They're going to see that one and be like, there's nobody there. The life in her is gone. I don't have to worry about that one. Move on to the next thing. So I said, you're going to have to change a little bit. You're going to have to select which pictures you do. So they did that. And then what they got was basically, I'm going to give you a way too quick version of this one, but if, this is a piece of toast. This is another piece of toast. These are two halves of the brain, and let's make a generalization, okay, that up here are part of the prefrontal cortex, that when you see activation up here, you see, the fMRI light up in colors up here, this is where people are thinking about, they're thinking, what am I going to do? I'm making a decision. I'm thinking about what's going on. Back here is kind of, we'll call it observation. Now, this is a little too simplistic, but it's basically what we're working on. So when stuff's lighting up back here, I'm looking at what's going on, but I'm not necessarily thinking about it. Up here, I'm thinking about it. ROTC cadets, picture hits them, and you see all kinds of activation up front. You see sporadic activation out back. So you might see, the ROTC cadets, if you said kind of areas of activation, you saw something like this. This is a snapshot in time, and it kind of changed over time, but that's generally what you saw. Special operations troops, so remember, I'm calling this observation, and I'm calling this thinking. And if you take those two as true, special ops guys, you saw this. And this was constant. This was happening constantly over the course of their decision making. The special ops guys, and these aren't just special ops guys, these are like the cream of the crop. These are the best guys out there. This is what you saw from them. Massive rear brain activation and nothing else. And then you saw blip. So step 1, step 2, and no crossover. Just glows in the back, pink up front, done. Any idea, what would your interpretation of those data be?
Evaluating the situation, spending a lot of time observing and evaluating the situation?
So observing does happen in the back. Evaluation happens up front.
Oh, yeah.
So they're not spending a lot of time evaluating. In fact, they're barely spending any time evaluating.
They're trained at making quick decisions.
Are they trained at making quick decisions? So are they sitting there and saying, I see what's going on. My process for making decision is do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That, by the way, was what they were trying to go in, and the people who ran this study wanted to say, these guys know how to make quick decisions. These guys don't. You can teach somebody, and they called it cognitive reappraisal, to go through the process of cognitive reappraisal, and by cognitively reappraising what's going on, you can make the same decision that these other guys are going to get to in a short amount of time. The hypothesis failed.
Yeah, I was going to say you can't train some of that stuff.
They were reacting. They were not thinking. Now, does that mean that these guys are just a bunch of meatheads that didn't do any thinking? What happened? Their thinking happened in time previously. Way previously, some of them years. So it wasn't that what happens in that case is you see, most of these were medical situations. Medical situation, okay? They look, here's this woman with her head completely blown apart. And they have to say, basically, it's observe, and the answer is dead. And the thought is move. That was it. There's no thinking to go on here. Another one is horrific wounds, observation, stitches, answer, already been taken care of, move on to the next. Because I'm doing triage. The triage thing is, who needs help next? Answer, not that guy. Someone already fixed him. I'm going to go help somebody else. That's what was happening here. There was one exception that caused this kind of activation in the minds of, actually it was, big rear brain activation, but lots of stuff going up on front too, in them. And it was the photos of women who had end up in the ER because they were abused by their husband, physically abused by their husbands. And they've taken the photos for evidence in court. So bruises on the arms and bellies and all this kind of stuff. And these guys, we found out later, hey, what were you thinking on those pictures? And the answer was like, I was trying to figure out how to find the guy, track him down, and beat the, whatever. And so they were in mid-planning. They were at that point thinking. So you'll notice it's not that they didn't think like that. It's if they were in a place where I need to think to get to my reaction, then they thought. But if the answer was I don't need to because I already know what I'm supposed to do, they just did it. They just did it. You want to be a super Christian. If you want to be a super Christian, make every moral decision before you're in it. Did Jesus do that? What's going to be your temptation if you have a legion of angels at your disposal and they start beating you with a scourge? Right? I mean, the gut instinct is like, boys, get in here and stop these knuckleheads. He spent probably years, and certainly in the garden, blood, sweat, and tears, getting to the point where he says, when this happens, I will do A and I will not do B. That's my hypothesis. It seems supported by the data, at least a plausible story. And when it comes to the way that we do business in here, I put this to the guys, you walk into a date with a girl and you haven't said, I'm not going to sit in the car with her, when we park the car, or I'm not going to go into her house when it's just her and I together. What's the probability that you're going to fail? High. When you've turned around ahead of time and been like, put it in park, 10 seconds, I'm out, never cross the threshold with her. When you actually stick with that, how many times does it fail? 0, because it's physically impossible, right? So you make your decisions ahead of time. This is where, so meditation to me is the opposite, the absolute opposite of what meditation is in Buddhism. What's meditation in Buddhism? Clear your mind. True meditation is think ahead of time, plumb the depths of your moral decision making, and say, when this comes up, and I know this is going to come up. And then we do this and this isn't worrying. We do this in, I got a job interview coming up. How do you prepare for a job interview? What do you do? What are the questions they're going to ask me? How am I going to answer those questions? In fact, if you've got access to somebody who's been through that interview, what do you say to them? What questions did they ask? What did it seem like they were evaluating for? And then you prepare yourself for it and you do it. Why do we do that for a job interview and we don't do that for the moral situations we're going to find ourselves in? If you were just wandering through life and saying, I'm not going to run into these moral situations, or I'll just deal with it when I get there, you're going to lose. You're going to lose a lot because you're walking right through Ambush Alley. If ahead of time you say, when I see this, I'm going to do that, you can be a special operations trooper. You can be a NFL superstar. You can be the world's greatest whatever, because all the work is done ahead of time when it comes to decision making. Okay, if I have any lesson, the total in now, I guess this is 3 weeks, you called it correctly, you laughed and then called it correctly, is this: if you don't make your choice ahead of time, you're going to end up making the choice that you don't want to make. So make your choices ahead of time. Simple. Very simple. Which means you got to change your lifestyle. And your lifestyle now has to be more reflective. It has to be more forward-looking. And then you can also ask, where does the mercy come into it? I hear that question. The mercy comes into it by saying this: I'm not very good at thinking 5 chess moves ahead. I don't know what's coming down the path. Lord, please prepare me for the things I'm going to run into. Now let me give you an example. Have you ever sat down and listened to something Mike said, and Mike tells you something, you're like, that's an interesting point. And then that week, you hit it, something, you're like, Mike just talked about this, and now I know the answer to it. Has that ever happened to you? Maybe once or twice. What often happens? Mike mentions something, or somebody on a preaching mentions something, and you're like, I just dealt with that last week. The fact that your ratio of, I dealt with this, I've just dealt with this previously, versus I'm holding it in my mind and I recognize it happened. Think about the range of things he's talking about. It should not be that way. If you're not realizing that after the fact, oh, I had heard about that beforehand, you're not paying attention. You're not paying attention. You're not thinking in advance. You need to start thinking in advance, and that's how to do better at this stuff. All right, we got a couple minutes left. Last points by anybody. Questions, comments?
There's also times when you don't know how to think because you don't have all the facts.
Yeah, and
You end up in a situation where you get stuck and you're just not sure how to process that.
so I'll give you.
Going back to what Scripture says, he says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not unto your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge me, I will direct your path.
Yes, and this to me is what you're talking about doing there are 2 scriptures. That's one of them that goes to it, where you say, But the trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. That acknowledging him, I'm telling you the best time to do that's ahead of time. So I agree with you. I'm just telling you when to do it. Don't do it in the moment. Do it ahead of time, and then you'll be much more effective. The other one, though, is the reason you don't have to worry about it is not saying don't think about it ahead of time. By all means, think about it ahead of time. But we can only think about so many things. So if we can only think about so many things, how do we know whether we're prepared? Well, we've got a promise. And what's the promise? The promise is this. No temptation has taken you, except those that are common to man, and God is faithful and will with the temptation provide a way out so that you may be able to bear it. What he says is, I won't let you get pushed into a situation that you can't do it. So that's very interesting. And by the way, in case you're looking for one that indicates it's your choice, that's not a bad one. But I would say to you, do the thinking. If you do the thinking ahead of time, that is the acknowledgement of God's ways. Because what does God say to do about his law? How often were we supposed to think about the commands of the Lord? All the time. When you wake up in the morning, when you lay down at night. David's talking about, I'm meditating on the law of God. Wow, that sounds insanely boring. Because it sounds like we're just be like, all right, hang on. So it's love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then do not have false idols. And then, okay, I'll recite those. That's not what meditating on the law of God means. Meditating on the law of God means like he told us to do these 2 things first. Then he told us to do these 3 things. Then he told us to do these 6 things. Why did he tell us to do those? Why in that order? Why does the order matter? This is meditating on them. And the more you think on them, the deeper that study is. When really, really good pastors and teachers call stuff out of Scripture, they're showing you how to meditate on Scriptures. They're showing you how to consider the law in your hearts. But the more you think about what's morally right to do, now you're doing the pre-training. Now you're doing that pre-decision making. And then turn around and notice the other thing he says. No temptation is taking you, but those that are common to man. If you categorize how many temptations there are out there, there are not a lot. It's like 20 major sets of temptations out there that can probably be reduced to 4 or 5. And if you're going to say, I can't be prepared for 20 things in life, come on. Of course you can. Of course you can. So go do it. Yes. Yes. And then you can feel yes, that's right. Yeah, I have used the example before of the way I've heard, I've never seen this, the way they train bank tellers to detect a counterfeit is they sit them down and they have them just count and sort money. And they do that so much that they can feel what real money. And the second they touch a counterfeit of a certain type, most types, they're like, something's not right about this one. And so then they bring the pen out and they mark it, and then it does, all that kind of stuff. So, yes, and so I thank you for bringing that up. I think that's a very good way to do it. We need to be feeling thousands of good things so that when the bad thing comes, we can recognize it and run from it. All right, last question. What do you want to do next? I think we said, unless there's an objection, we had said basically we were going to do these right here. This is what we just got done doing. Are free will and God's will contradictory? Or maybe we'll say we answered the first part of that, so we'll answer the final part of that, and then we'll get into the why does it matter and how do we take every thought captive. Now, spoiler alert.